Hi, welcome to Shelf Regulating System. My name is Sean. I'm currently doing a thing where I make sure I have read all of the books in this room because I moved into this house last year and realized that wasn't true for a lot of them. And any interesting ones or anything I think I can kind of talk around for a while, I'm going to do a video about on this channel. The first episode was last week and people were really nice about it. So thank you very much. Thank you for subscribing and thank you for sending it to other people. I really appreciate it, especially the people who were into my podcast who moved over to another medium and then immediately told me, is there a way I can get this as a podcast? Thanks, guys. That is exactly the kind of audience I thought I had created. And seriously, though, I really appreciate anybody who doesn't normally watch YouTube videos and watched it. With that said, we'll talk about this week's episode. So it's about Sarah Gerard's Binary Star. It's a fiction book. I will say before I go on that this book has depictions of dysmorphia, eating disorders, codependent and abusive relationships, and anything general stuff like that. So I'm going to be speaking about that probably at some length as well. So if that is the kind of thing that you don't want to hear about, apologies, and hopefully next week there'll be a topic that a topic a video you can watch. I am going to be covering a lot of transgressive literature on this channel. It's just the nature of a lot of stuff I like. So I wanted to mention something about trigger warnings, which is I think they're good basically. I obviously there is exaggerated propaganda about people, which has made it very easy for people to say that trigger warnings are bad. But anyone you see saying trigger warnings are bad are usually quite gullible people who have been tricked by the reactionary thing to make trigger warnings a meaningless word instead of something that refers to sparking off somebody's PTSD or interacting with a particular thing that interacts with somebody's PTSD. I think trigger warnings are good, and I think people that kind of make a big deal out of them tend to be the kind of people that make a big deal out of difficult literature and how it's really important to read really difficult stuff. Difficult literature is good. I'll be talking about a lot of difficult literature on this channel. I'm going to do a month probably on Dennis Cooper at some stage, one of my favorite authors and a very important author to me. And there's a lot of transgressive stuff. I don't think it's necessarily better, that when literature is transgressive. I think that's a little bit silly to just universally say that edgy stuff is better. Also, it's not impressive to read transgressive literature if it doesn't transgress against anything that you're that actually affects you or whatever. It's still a book, fair enough, but this idea that I don't know, I see a lot of people on the literary internet who are very gung-ho about how they read difficult books, and these are the kind of, not difficult as in William Gaddis or whatever, but brutal books, and people need to read this stuff. I'm I understand it, but it's not a little badge of honor that means they're all supposed to be good or anything. I mean, I don't believe in censorship. I mean, I do believe it's real. It's not fucking Santa Claus or whatever, but I don't encourage it or I don't think it's a good idea. But I think people who read difficult literature and find them, and the only come out the other side basically saying that, oh well, this very challenging book, I read it and it turns out I'm right about everything, and that's it. All this violence perpetrated against people that don't look like me have taught me that my preconceptions are correct. I'm a literary genius. So I thought it was important to mention that I kind of how I felt about that before we go any further with the channel. Also, people on the book internet seem to think that books are inherently good and that reading books makes you a better person. No, it doesn't. Plenty of idiots read hundreds of books a year. Doesn't help. Plenty of really, really horrible shit people read a lot of books. Books don't make you a better person. Books, they're cultural objects like anything else. They're not magic or any shit like that. I just don't believe that, and I think that is an attitude that mainly exists so the dying number of bookshops that still exist on planet Earth can sell tote bags to people. Sorry. So if you're one of the reading is special people, every other book channel has a big, soliloquy to how reading is special. Go talk to them. I just think I like reading books, but I don't think it makes me a fucking saint or whatever or better than other people. Now, all that being said, let's actually talk about the book we're going to talk about this week. So Sarah Gerard has written a lot of articles and stuff, but this was her first novel. I think it came out in 2014, as far as I can remember, and I bought this in the London Review of Books bookshop, which is very nice and in London and a bookshop I exclusively remember as being extremely expensive. That seems like an unfair thing to do in the the age of dwindling bricks and mortar bookshops, but it was really dear. Anyway, so this book I bought at the time, and I was really interested in it, partially because Harry Matthews, who's one of my favorite novelists and writers, the only American in the Aleppo French experimental group, which produced a lot of really, really annoying people, but also a lot of good literature. Harry Matthews said, "By now I've read Binary Star twice, and I've become so entwined with it that I'm reluctant to talk about the subject at length. Let me just say that I've never read anything like it." So that alone intrigued me. Also, the idea that it is about Sarah Gerard recovered from anorexia and has spoken about this, and she's kind of used this novel to maybe to find a new way to talk about it in fiction. I'm always interested to see people talk about something like this in a new way, because there have been fictionalized depictions of anorexia before, notably the Karen Carpenter story, directed by Todd Haynes.
Karen, I think she's coming too.
Karen?
Where am I? You're in the hospital, dear.
You collapsed on stage.
From exhaustion and malnutrition.
You'll be here 5 more days.
Then home for plenty of rest.
You're gonna be under Mom's constant care.
I'll cook for you.
She's gonna fatten you up.
No more dieting.
No more laxatives.
And we'll all be together again.
Which is very intense, and it does put across what having an eating disorder, is like in a way. But this is kind of a new way of doing it, which is the story itself is about a couple who both have an addiction issues, or the John is an alcoholic who's the alcohol interacts poorly with his medication, the medication he's on, so he can't really function in society. He also has parents who give him a lot of money. That is kind of made clear throughout. And the narrator character has an eating disorder, anorexia, and is also an astronomy student, or an astronomy, I think, going to be an astronomy lecturer maybe, is in third level education for astronomy. And this is where the title Binary Star comes from, because a binary star is 2 stars, I think, which will eventually destroy each other in a very violent way. So you can see initially, or immediately rather, why that's a pretty powerful way to think about the relationship. But she expands that over and over throughout the book, and really, really investigates it. So I will say that there's a lot of scientific explanations in the book. For instance, if you're curious, like, what about a more sciencey way of looking at a binary star? I can show you this.
Binary system. Star 1, radius R1, mass M1, velocity V1, and star 2, going about their common center of mass, mass M2, radius R2, and velocity V2. M1 R1 equals M2 R2. That's the way the center of mass is defined. Imagine that you as an observer are somewhere in the plane of this orbit, and you are here. And you're observing this system going around.
And yeah, there is a lot of stuff in the book like that, and but it always comes, the hammer always comes straight after something very, very emotionally kind of poignant. And the way they're contrasted and the way they eventually intertwine, this discussion of heavenly bodies and this discussion of decaying bodies with the two people in the relationship, is pretty intense and well done. This is a book where you're kind of reading the main character, and it's both their internal monologue, what they're saying out loud, and what they're feeling, the other person is feeling, and it's all presented as this sort of stream of consciousness in a very, very interesting sort of I hate calling things interesting, sorry, in a very fluid way, right? And it can, like thoughts, like your own internal monologue, it can go from being mundane and sort of sardonic into being extremely cruel and extremely intense very quickly, because that's how human beings work, right? So that's kind of that is the way the novel is written. There's no one line really I can take out, or I will try to, but it would make more sense if I read you like a little bit of the book. So I'm going to do that now. Let me see if I can find it. Here we are. Belief is brittle. My skin is dry and brittle and cracks. I am always bleeding, especially from the fingers. I do not believe that John loves me. There. I believe that John used to love me. I do without my body. I am you. I am me. I am you. I am me. I am always end with you. Do you remember what happened last night? I don't. The question is, what do I want in my center? The question is, what do I want? I blow smoke into myself. Do I want anything without John? I don't know what I want. I know some of what I don't want. I don't want to be heavy. I don't want to be a burden. If I believe in anything, likeness. I once thought you were a neutron star. I thought I was a neutron star. I could never be a neutron star. There is not enough of me to be a neutron star. A white dwarf is the final state of a star whose mass is too small to be a neutron star. We're confusing terms. A white dwarf no longer uses fusion. It is held together by degeneracy pressure, extreme pressure. This is the only thing supporting it against collapse. This is also the only thing that keeps it from exploding. A white dwarf depends on density. A white dwarf isn't burning. It isn't doing anything productive. It doesn't matter that I'm not burning anymore. I haven't burned for a long time. I approach my natural state of being. Cold is my natural state of being. I grow dimmer every day. Lightness very much depends on will. I have basically starved myself of will, of want, of whether and what I believe. In happiness, in being better. I was born without will. I was born with certain beliefs, in sacrifice, humility. I am mostly devoid of feelings on purpose. Feeling is fleshy. Don't touch me. If you touch me, you have to hurt me. I don't want you to be afraid. What matters now that isn't? You used to paint. Now, when you paint, it shapes overlaying each other. Transparency, reds, blues, I see through them all. John is mostly concerned with appearances. In this way, we're alike. In this way, we're destructive. We have only ever believed in appearances. Even now, you have only ever believed in appearances. A white dwarf cannot exceed a certain mass. I reach a limit that my pressure can't sustain. You want me to be better. John wants me to be better. John doesn't want me to be better. John doesn't want to be better. John doesn't want me. Is that true? Let's stop. We're circling each other. So there you have it. That's a particularly heady and intense passage in the book, but there are many of them. That one is specifically kind of, I chose it because the heavenly bodies or the space stuff and the relationship stuff is really strongly intertwined there as it becomes more and more as the book reaches its finish. But I think it's really, really striking to me as someone who has also had problems with eating, albeit the other kind. I have real problem with binge eating. That the way that it insinuates itself into every single aspect of your thinking and your internal monologue. How the narrator can go from dealing with something totally else to suddenly, to having anxiety about the relationship, to suddenly thinking about the number of pounds she is, obsessing over the number of pounds. All this stuff happens in one fiery ball, right? All this stuff just again and again and again. And, it's interesting to me that, eating disorders and writing about them, there's a kind of a perception, less so with anorexia, but more so with something like binge eating, that an eating disorder is basically weakness. It's a lack of resolve. And I think resolve and toughness or whatever has been really fetishized, both by Joe Rogan weirdos, but also by the kind of health and wellness industry. This sort of steely resolve. And you can see the logical endpoint of that throughout this book, where all of the ways that, as Sarah Gerard said in an interview, that celebrity culture cuts people apart, so they're constituent parts. They talk about their legs as if they're not part of a functioning body. They talk about their neck, the thigh gap diet, whatever, that kind of thing. You can see the effect of that brought to its natural conclusion, because eating disorders are not to me are not weakness, they're hate. Right, and you can see again with all that kind of people talk about harnessing hate or using anger as an energy. Well, that's what it feels like. That's what it feels like. It's not useful. It's not interesting. It's just all consuming. And it is once you see her addiction interact with John's, it is very, very, striking. Both of them have agreed before this road trip. This is one of the most heartbreaking details to me, honestly, and it rings really true. Both of them agree before this road trip that he won't drink and she won't. She will eat, and she won't. Basically engage in bulimic kind of practices. Both of them immediately break that and start doing it, and it's particularly devastating when they're kind of traveling around. There are moments of solitude. One of the most striking things about the book is both of them are committed to veganism. This is kind of an undercurrent, but it happens a lot. But you realize that they're meeting people from distros and they're talking about veganism in direct action, and the way that the two disorders interact with it, whereas John is constantly railing against people and exploding with anger about veganism while getting money from his parents, and which isn't necessarily anything to do with veganism, but it's more like commitment to the life or whatever, and also wearing leather belts and stuff like that, and always having an answer for these apparent hypocrisies. Whereas the narrator character, she obviously, veganism is very, very good if you want to mask an eating disorder, and indeed, and in a way that's very familiar to me, there are bits of the book where she rehearses all the excuses for why she's not eating, and rehearses the excuses for why she looks the way she does, and thyroid disease, I think, comes up a lot. So in addition to this, to the kind of solar system and the astronomy stuff, you have this good cause, and you see how when it's kind of filtered through people's pathologies, it can actually be really, really damaging. That's a very important part of addiction, and that is very rarely explored. So I was really happy to see that, because the wellness internet or whatever has really, really created that stuff in a lot of people. Something relating to the veganism issue is sort of like how when you have one of these disorders, everything becomes filtered through it. So that's kind of how it feels, that you have this really, really high level, to me anyway, understanding of astronomy, but it's still these are entire stars. These are massive, massive spans of distance and objects, but they're all jammed through the window of understanding that is your disorder, right? You still, and it's very, very expertly done that these two, that space becomes this extended allegory and the binary star. But it's so striking that, again, it just breaks down the way you think. And as the book progresses and as it gets more intense towards the end, there is that almost cosmic coming apart of the narrator. And I won't spoil where it goes, but it's very, very, very just kind of overwhelming. Another thing that's interesting to consider about the book is that it's kind of based on personal experience, where Sarah Gerard has suffered from anorexia and did want to filter through her experiences. There's an interview where she talks about and she's written a New York Times article as well, where she talks about getting a very, very bad injury to her face while doing that thing. What do they call it? Like riding the rails, I guess. William Vollman does it a lot. And coming out of a train and basically getting her face hit. I wouldn't normally talk about somebody's physical appearance or an accident like that if it wasn't relevant. In this case, I actually saw her say that because the physical ideal, because of that scar, became unattainable, it almost helped let the idea of anorexia go. Very, very, very just revealing about how that thought process can work, because you're really, really damaging yourself, and even there's a point where she Google image searches after she throws up anorexic teeth, and all these little details accumulate, But what does it mean when somebody writes their own experience into fiction? I was kind of thinking about it, because there's a lot of these. It's one of the things that get used to promote a book a lot now, is this idea that this person really experienced this. I think the most hilarious example, of course, is James Fry's A Million Little Pieces, where he wrote a section about getting out, being in a car chase and beating up 1,000 police officers, and it turned out he had accidentally bumped into a light post or something, because obviously he used everyone's real name in the book, and it came out, and Oprah was really mad with him. I think he just still has a career now, though. But anyway, be they fantasists or be they not, this real experience is used often to sell books. I wonder what that does to how you regard books. I had thought there was a discussion between John Berger and Susan Sontag about this as part of a kind of a thing about what is a story. I was going to like clumsily reiterate it here, but I think I'll just show it to you.
That was truth. Then I tried to write that story.
And then you started inventing.
I started inventing, but in relation to the truth. But, if it worked, I don't know, this story will be read as fiction. And it will be read as fiction about a story of more or less unrequited love. And why will it be fiction? Because it will exist both everywhere and nowhere. And it is that displacement of place and time which makes something fiction, it seems to me.
But why would it be read as taking place everywhere and nowhere? Don't you situate it in the village where you live?
For me, it's situated in the village. But as soon as one reads a story, when we read other people's stories, we have an idea of that place, but it becomes part of our experience and therefore is displaced from where it really took place. I mean, it seems to me that fiction is something which exists, which goes beyond its immediate time or its immediate place. And it's exactly that which makes it fiction, or what we call fiction.
I don't have that experience, I think. Well, of course it's true that I'm not where the story is taking place, but if you're talking about some kind of traditional storytelling which is grounded in a particular place, if I read a story of Tolstoy,
Yes.
I think I'm in 19th century or early 20th century Russia. I don't think it's taking place everywhere.
But it applies to you and your experience of life.
Not necessarily. No, it might instruct my experience rather than apply to it. I mean, I'm not looking to see myself projected in stories any more than I'm trying to express myself when I write stories. No, I don't think stories are necessarily universal because they're read by very different kinds of people.
Now, I think it would be cheating if I said something vague in a video about books and then brought up a clip of John Berger or Susan Sontag saying it far better than me, and I could just be like, yeah, and take the credit. So what I wanted to do there was show them disagreeing. Very, very telling disagreement, I think, between them both, showing their different kind of approaches. I thought a lot about this autobiographical element to the book while I was reading it, because, I mean, in a sense, my doing the review is like a micro version of it, where you are necessarily going to get asked about yourself a lot, and it does feel like, it's fiction. Like, it is fiction. It's not what happened, but because there's that kernel of truth in it, it will always be the thing that some people will draw to. Even I read an interview with her on some website where a person was saying that it helped them with their own eating disorder, and then asked, was there any other fiction that dealt with it? And she said she'd be uncomfortable recommending any. And it was clear that it's very difficult when there's the thing you want to talk about the least, and the thing you want to talk about the least, but it is obviously the thing you have to make art about, if you want to. And as we discussed, there's no moral imperative to art or whatever. It doesn't automatically make what you're doing good or interesting. But yeah, it's quite tough. And then when that gets universalized, like we see when John Berger says that the idea of fiction means somebody can take it and put it on themselves. That, like, if it's fiction, someone can take this and wear it like a mask, right? Like put themselves in this experience, whereas Susan Sontag is taken into the experience in that clip. And I found myself, maybe it's the degree to which you can engage with the material, because I was so familiar with a lot of the thought patterns and thought processes of this book that I felt very much like it was an extension of how I thought, and the idea of being in a relationship with somebody who also had a conflicting almost addiction of overconsumption is very, very overwhelming, and you know, when you bring in the kind of astronomy angle, it's quite striking. So I hope that was interesting. I hope that was sort of worthwhile. I really, really enjoyed the book. I thought it was very, very hard going, but very good. I'm going to do the worst book person on the internet thing. Quick read. But it goes very fast because, like Harry Matthews says, it sort of takes you with it on its journey, and it ends in a very, very surprising way, and it kind of more from the style, honestly, than the content. Although the content is also quite surprising, but it kind of atomizes in this very striking way. So I would really, really recommend it. I think that there's something about cathartic writing that is like a controlled burn. I don't know if you know what a controlled burn is. It's sort of when they burn back crops on purpose to, you know, so that they will regrow again. You know, that's what cathartic writing, because it gives you that control, has always felt like to me. And I think when writers become victims of their own myth or whatever, it can often be because they're chasing something to have catharsis with, or they think that's a key part of their existence. It's very clear from the language that used in the book and the level of intensity that the main thing that I would take away from Sarah Gerard's writing would be control. Just the tone is so precise, and it depicts, because you're depicting mania with precision. It's really, really difficult to do in a kind of a honest feeling way, and that's what it is. If you enjoyed this, thank you for watching the whole way through, and link somebody else to it. Why not? And even though it's a bit intense, I guess. And yeah, thanks for watching.